June 23, 1942. On the coast of South Wales, spotters at RAF Pembrey raise their binoculars to the sky. A lone fighter is descending through the clouds, its sleek, aggressive profile instantly recognizable. It's German, a Focke-Wulf 190. Instinct takes over. This is wrong. All wrong. Shouldn't air raid sirens be screaming across the airfield? Shouldn't the anti-aircraft crews be scrambling, their guns swiveling to track this deadly intruder? But they don't. They just watch. Because something about this feels off. The German plane isn't strafing the runway. It isn't dropping bombs. It's lining up for a perfectly normal landing. Its landing gear is down. Its approach is smooth, professional, almost serene. The Focke-Wulf 190, the deadliest fighter in the German arsenal, touches down gently on the grass runway. It rolls to a perfect stop, not far from the control tower. The powerful radial engine sputters, coughs, and then falls silent. The air is still. The canopy slides back with a smooth mechanical hiss. A young German pilot, Oberleutnant Armin Faber of the elite Jagdgeschwader II, climbs out of his cockpit. He pulls off his leather helmet, runs a hand through his hair, and looks around, expecting the familiar sights of a Luftwaffe base in occupied France. Instead, his blood runs cold. The aircraft parked on the flight line, they aren't Messerschmitts. They're Spitfires. Dozens of them. The men running towards him, their boots pounding on the grass, their uniforms aren't Luftwaffe gray. They're Royal Air Force blue. In that single, heart-stopping moment, a horrifying realization crashes down on Armin Faber. At the exact same instant, across southern England, the same realization is striking British intelligence officers like a bolt of lightning. Germany's most lethal fighter, the aircraft that had been slaughtering Allied pilots for 8 agonizing months. The mysterious, seemingly invincible new weapon, known as the Butcher Bird, had just been delivered, completely intact, into the hands of the Royal Air Force. The pilot had gotten lost. He thought he was in France. The intelligence windfall was almost unbelievable. It was the equivalent of the Soviets accidentally parking a brand new MiG-29 on an American runway during the Cold War. But what British and American test pilots would discover when they finally got their hands on this aircraft, that would change the very nature of air combat. It would rewrite the rules of engagement and give the Allies the playbook they desperately needed to win the war in the skies over Europe. For 8 long months, the Focke-Wulf 190 had been a ghost, a nightmare haunting every Allied pilot who dared to cross the English Channel. It first appeared over France in September 1941, and from its very first dogfight, it was clear that the game had changed. The British Spitfire Mark V, until then the king of the skies, was suddenly obsolete. Squadron leader J.E. Johnson, who would go on to become Britain's top-scoring ace of the war, had a terrifying run-in with the FW-190 in early 1942. He barely made it back alive. He later wrote, and you can feel the shock in his words, "It was faster than our Spitfire Mark Vs in level flight and in the dive. It could outroll us. Its firepower was devastating. For the first time in the war, our fighters were comprehensively outclassed." He wasn't exaggerating. The statistics were grim. In the first half of 1942, RAF fighter losses over France skyrocketed. Veteran pilots, heroes who had survived the desperate days of the Battle of Britain, were being shot down in flames by an aircraft they simply could not match. Imagine being one of those pilots. You've been trained, you're confident in your machine, you're a proven warrior. You spot a German fighter and move to engage, but it's like fighting a phantom. If you chase it in a dive, it just pulls away, leaving you in the dust. If you get into a turning fight, it performs a snap roll, reversing its direction in the blink of an eye, and suddenly he's on your tail. And if he gets a shot, you're finished. His cannons fire 20mm explosive shells that can tear the wing off a Spitfire with a single horrifying burst. When the first American pilots of the U.S. Army Air Forces arrived in Britain with their brand new heavyweight P-47 Thunderbolts, the warnings they received were dire and chilling. The briefings were less about what to do and more about what not to do. Don't engage the 190 in a turning fight. Don't try to outroll it. Don't, under any circumstances, get into a diving competition. The list of what would get you killed was long. The list of what would work, it was terrifyingly, depressingly short. Allied intelligence was in a state of panic. They needed answers, and they needed them yesterday. What made this plane so damn good? What was the secret to its performance? What were its weaknesses? There had to be weaknesses, but to find them, they needed to get their hands on one. Every FW-190 that had been shot down over Britain so far had either disintegrated on impact or been burned to a wreck. The secrets remained locked away in twisted metal. And then, on a cloudy June afternoon, Oberleutnant Armin Faber made his catastrophic mistake. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what made this plane tick, I'm curious, where are you all watching from today? And what have you heard about the legendary Focke-Wulf 190? Let me know in the comments below if this story is new to you and if you enjoy these deep dives into military history. It takes a ton of research to get these details right, and knowing you appreciate it makes it all worthwhile. And if you do, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Okay, so who was this pilot who handed the Allies the keys to the kingdom? Oberleutnant Armin Faber was not some green novice pilot, far from it. At just 21 years old, he was already an accomplished ace with multiple aerial victories to his name. He was a skilled and respected member of Jagdgeschwader II, the legendary Richthofen fighter wing, one of the Luftwaffe's most elite units. On June 23, 1942, Faber was flying as part of a fighter sweep over the English Channel, providing top cover for German bombers. The mission itself was fairly routine, but on the flight back to France, everything went wrong. During a swirling, chaotic dogfight with British Spitfires, Faber became disoriented. This wasn't uncommon. Imagine flying at over 400 miles per hour, pulling high-G maneuvers that drain the blood from your brain, weaving through thick cloud cover with no clear view of the ground. Your compass is spinning, your sense of direction is gone. It's a terrifying state known as spatial disorientation. In the heat of battle, Faber had executed a 180-degree turn and simply hadn't realized it. When he finally broke through the clouds and saw a green, peaceful countryside with an airfield below, his brain, starved of oxygen and desperate for familiar cues, made a simple, fatal assumption. This must be France. That must be a Luftwaffe base. He was, in fact, over Wales, looking at Royal Air Force Pembrey. As he landed and saw the unmistakable elliptical wings of the Spitfires lining the runway, panic set in. Faber frantically tried to restart his engine to make a desperate dash back into the sky, but it was too late. RAF ground crew, initially stunned, were now surrounding his aircraft. Within minutes, he was a prisoner of war. And his pristine Focke-Wulf 190A3, the Luftwaffe's crown jewel, was sitting on an enemy runway, a gift from the gods. The news shot up the chain of command. The reaction at RAF headquarters wasn't just excitement, it was pure, unadulterated euphoria. Air Chief Marshal Sholto Douglas, the head of RAF Fighter Command, immediately issued an order. Get that plane to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, now. Within 48 hours, the FW-190 was dismantled, loaded onto trucks, and transported under heavy guard to the top-secret testing facility. Britain's best aviation engineers, the finest minds in the country, descended upon it like vultures. They were about to dissect the legend. And what they found explained everything. The Focke-Wulf 190 was a masterpiece, not of elegant design like the Spitfire, but of brutal, uncompromising functionality. Every part of it was built for one purpose, to kill other airplanes efficiently. First, the engine. The BMW 801 radial engine was an air-cooled beast, churning out a massive 1,700 horsepower. The Spitfire V's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, by comparison, produced around 1,470 horsepower. That raw power gave the 190 incredible acceleration and a superior rate of climb at lower altitudes. But the plane's most devastating secret weapon wasn't its horsepower, it was its roll rate. Think of a dogfight.
It's not about flying in smooth, graceful circles. It's about changing direction as quickly as humanly possible to get your guns on the enemy or to evade his. The FW-190 could snap from a hard bank in one direction to a hard bank in the other faster than any Allied fighter in the sky. It was breathtakingly agile. When a Spitfire pilot tried to follow a 190 through a series of rolling maneuvers, it was like trying to follow a hummingbird. The British plane felt sluggish, heavy. The German pilot could reverse direction, jink, and line up a killing shot before the Allied pilot even knew what was happening. The legendary British test pilot, Captain Eric Winkle Brown, flew the captured FW-190 extensively. He immediately understood why his comrades were dying. The ailerons were light and responsive at all speeds, he reported. You could throw this aircraft around the sky with almost no effort. The Spitfire required muscle and finesse. The FW-190 responded to thought. Then there was the firepower.
It was simply overwhelming. The model Faber had delivered, the A3 variant, was armed with 4 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns. A short 2-second burst from the FW-190 delivered more explosive mass, more destructive power than a Spitfire Mark V could put out in 10 seconds of continuous firing. The weapons were also mounted close to the fuselage, creating a tight, concentrated cone of fire that was incredibly lethal at typical combat ranges. And finally, its performance in a dive. The 190 was heavier than the Spitfire, and its aerodynamic design was cleaner. When a German pilot got into trouble, he could simply push the stick forward and dive for the ground. Any Spitfire that tried to follow would watch helplessly as the German fighter pulled away, disappearing into the distance. So the engineers at Farnborough had confirmed the nightmare. The FW-190 was faster, could roll faster, hit harder, and dive faster. It seemed invincible. But it wasn't. As the tests continued, the engineers began to find the chinks in the armor. And this is where the intelligence value went from tactical to strategic. This is where it became pure gold. The first weakness was the engine. That powerful BMW 801 radial engine had a flaw. It was air-cooled, which meant it relied on the flow of air to prevent it from overheating. At high altitudes, where the air is thin, it just didn't get enough cooling. Above 20,000 feet, the FW-190's performance started to drop off a cliff. The engine struggled, lost power, and threatened to overheat. The Spitfire's Merlin engine, on the other hand, was liquid-cooled and equipped with a brilliant supercharger specifically designed for high-altitude performance. The higher a Spitfire went, the better it performed. The advantage was completely reversed. Second, the turning circle. The same weight that made the FW-190 a fantastic diver made it less nimble in a prolonged horizontal turning fight. It could outroll a Spitfire in an instant, but if an Allied pilot could survive that initial move and trap the 190 in a sustained, looping turn-and-burn dogfight, the Spitfire's lighter wing loading would give it the edge. The German would bleed energy faster, and eventually the Spitfire would get on his tail. But the most critical weakness they found was in the controls. At very high speeds, like in a steep dive, the controls of the FW-190 became incredibly heavy. The pilot had to use immense physical strength just to pull the plane out of the dive. This created a moment of extreme vulnerability. The British engineers realized that if an Allied fighter couldn't catch the 190 in the initial dive, it could catch it during the pullout. As the German pilot was literally wrestling with his own aircraft, fighting to level off, he was a sitting duck. Suddenly, the Allies had a playbook, a set of rules to defeat the butcher bird. British intelligence immediately began cranking out new tactical bulletins. They were sent to every RAF squadron on the front line. But they also did something else, something that would prove absolutely crucial to winning the air war. They picked up the phone and called their new allies, the Americans. In August 1942, a group of top U.S. Army Air Force test pilots arrived at Farnborough to meet Germany's secret weapon face-to-face. Among them was Major Cass S. Huff. He flew the captured FW-190, pushed it to its limits, and then filed a detailed, brutally honest report that was sent to every American fighter group preparing to deploy to Europe.
His assessment changed everything. The FW-190, he wrote, will beat any Allied fighter below 20,000 feet if the German pilot knows what he is doing. Our advantage is altitude. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and later model Spitfires have the edge. Force them high and we win. Let them dictate a low-altitude combat and we die. That single piece of intelligence became the foundation of American fighter tactics in Europe. When the big P-47 Thunderbolt squadrons began flying missions in 1943, their doctrine was simple: stay high. Bomber escorts flew tens of thousands of feet above the bombers. Fighter sweeps were conducted at the P-47's maximum operational ceiling. When German fighters rose to intercept, the American pilots would do something that seemed counterintuitive. They would climb even higher, baiting the FW-190s to follow them up into the thin, cold air where their engines would gasp and their performance would crumble. Up high, the heavy P-47 was in its element, and the FW-190 was a fish out of water. The captured plane, now designated MP-499, also had a direct impact on American aircraft design. Engineers at Wright Field in Ohio studied its incredible roll rate and immediately began working on modifications to the ailerons of the P-47 and the new P-51 Mustang to improve their responsiveness. They studied the German gun placement, influencing American ideas about weapons concentration. They even took notes on the cockpit layout, which was a marvel of ergonomic efficiency, designed for a pilot under the extreme stress of combat. But perhaps the most important lesson was psychological. The FW-190 was no longer a mythical, invincible monster. It was just a machine. A brilliant machine, yes, but one with specific advantages and exploitable weaknesses. Allied pilots, who had been terrified by the 190's reputation, now had a concrete plan. They knew how to fight it, and they knew how to win. By late 1943, the tide had turned. The new American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were engaging the Luftwaffe at high altitude, where they held all the cards. The new Spitfire Mark IX, equipped with an upgraded Merlin engine, could now match the FW-190's performance across almost all altitudes. The kill ratios, which had been so heavily in Germany's favor, began to shift dramatically. FW-190 losses mounted. German pilots were bewildered. The Allied pilots were no longer making the same old mistakes. They weren't being suckered into low-altitude turning fights. They refused to follow them into dives. They were fighting a different, smarter war. Oberleutnant Josef Pips, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, noted the change in his combat journal in late 1943. "The Americans have clearly studied our aircraft," he wrote with frustration. "They know not to follow us into rolling scissors. They force us high where our engines labor. They have learned." They had learned indeed. Armin Faber's captured FW-190 remained at Farnborough for the rest of the war, a living reference library. When new German variants appeared, like the long-nosed FW-190D9, Dora, in late 1944, Allied intelligence could immediately compare its performance to the baseline model they knew so intimately, quickly identifying the improvements and developing new countermeasures. After the war, historians tried to calculate the impact of that one pilot's mistake. The intelligence from that single aircraft was shared with thousands of Allied pilots. It shaped tactical doctrine, influenced aircraft development, and saved an untold number of lives. Captain Eric Brown, the man who probably flew more captured enemy aircraft than anyone else, put it best. "Faber's navigation error gave us the Rosetta Stone for understanding German fighter design." Every tactical advantage the FW-190 possessed was documented, and every weakness was exploited. That single aircraft probably saved more Allied lives than any intelligence coup of the war. The supreme irony wasn't lost on the Germans. One captured Luftwaffe intelligence officer later commented, "We spent months, years, trying to capture a Spitfire Mark IX intact so we could study it. The British didn't have to try. We delivered our best fighter directly to them with a full tank of fuel." And what of the pilot at the center of it all? Armin Faber spent the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp in Canada.
He survived and eventually returned to Germany, where he lived until 1976. He was, by all accounts, a man haunted by a single, disorienting moment that may have changed the course of the air war. The story of Faber's Focke-Wulf teaches a vital lesson about warfare. The FW-190 was a quantum leap in technology. For almost a year, it was the undisputed master of the skies. But that technological advantage was fragile. It evaporated the moment the mystery was gone. No weapon is invincible. Every design is a series of compromises. The 190's low-altitude power came at the cost of high-altitude performance. Its amazing roll rate came with the penalty of heavy controls at high speed. Once the Allies understood these trade-offs, the Butcher Bird was just another target. Today, the FW-190 is rightly remembered as one of the greatest fighter aircraft of all time, but its story is forever tied to the incredible intelligence coup that laid its secrets bare for the world to see. In the complex calculus of war, one pilot's momentary confusion over the English Channel turned Germany's greatest weapon into the Allies' greatest teacher. The plane that Armin Faber accidentally delivered to Britain became the very aircraft that taught the Allies how to win. Superior technology is a powerful advantage, but superior intelligence, as this story proves, matters so much more.